Welcome to the Life Expansion After 50 podcast. Today's episode, we're talking about professional area part 2. Part 1 was focused on cognitive biases as they relate to the professional area. And we ended by talking about some leadership principles, or getting into the leadership principles that you can use in creating a high-performing team. Where we ended up, we were talking about red, white, and blue language, which is a powerful tool to use in developing a team, especially when you want the high performance to occur when you're not around. And to me, that's what it's all about. Supervisors are always there watching. They are supervision they're over you, they're overlooking you. Managers check in periodically. They may be around a few times a week. Leaders can be gone for weeks and months at a time, and they're still getting the performance because they've conditioned it. The same way you look at a team, high-performing teams, the coach does the conditioning and work during the week. On the field, the players execute. And if you ever watch high-performing teams execute, you can see the instantaneous reaction that happens. So consider that the conscious mind has a reaction time of anywhere from 0.2 to 0.7 of a second, depending on how distracted they are and some other factors. When you look at players on the field at a high level, it's instantaneous. It's almost like it's faster than the latency between it happening in front of the eyes and the brain recording it. It's so close to instantaneous, and it's because it's conditioned. So the conscious mind has a reaction time of 0.2 to 0.7 of a second, as I said. The unconscious processes 11 million bits per second, and it starts instantaneously. So by 0.2 of a second, the unconscious could have processed 2 million bits. And that's why you have that instantaneous reaction. And so when it comes to leading people, you want to have that same kind of instantaneous reaction. You don't want your presence or proximity to be the reason why they're performing at a high level. Let's talk about it bit by bit. The first area I want to talk about is serotonin and dopamine. These are two chemicals that are well known to apply to conditioning, but people don't talk about it a lot. So dopamine, I think, is people pretty well get it. It's also the addiction chemical. I look at the brain from the 2 million year old aspect in the hunter-gatherer environment. And a lot of this makes sense when you do it that way. So the dopamine, the reason why it's so powerful as a motivator and reinforcer is because it's the chemical that kept the hunter-gatherer ancestors going out to hunt and gather food, even though they knew that they could die. There's lions and tigers and bears out there. And so the dopamine made them go anyway. It's that reinforcement of the dopamine. So we want to use that in our favor. We don't want it to be used against us. The serotonin, on the other hand, by the way, serotonin, the majority, people, I'm told, scientists tell me that the serotonin, 90% of it is in the gut. It's not in the brain. It's interesting that when they treat depression, they often give prescription medication that puts more serotonin in the brain. But it's odd because if the majority of serotonin is in the gut, doesn't that seem out of pattern? But regardless, now, I call serotonin the one-upmanship chemical or hormone. When a person one-ups somebody, they get a boost in serotonin, and serotonin makes them feel good. Now, this is not the strong motivator that dopamine is. When a hunter-gatherer goes out and gets food and brings it back, they get a strong hit of dopamine that reinforces that same behavior. Serotonin, on the other hand, when they get one-upped, it takes a dip. When they one-up someone else, it gets a lift. And this is just a simplistic way of explaining it, so we don't have to get into scientific terminology. But if you think about it like a bully, the reason why a bully bullies is because they keep getting that serotonin, it feels good, and then they have to go out and bully somebody, and then they feel good. But what's interesting about the bully example is that when a person stands up to that bully, even if it's somebody who's cowered to them for years, all the way through high school, for example, but one time that person stands up to the bully, and the bully never messes with them again. Now, if the bully has a fight record of 100-1 with that person, why is it that the one time they stand up, it stops the bully cold? Because the serotonin dip is such a strong demotivator, it makes the person take a step back. So I look at serotonin as the chemical that keeps people from taking action because they don't like the dip. So every time you have a setback, if somebody scares you, if you have a failure, you stumble, these are some of the things that cause us to not move forward. Taking it to the workplace. If you're in sales, I'm sure that you've seen this happen. Let's say you come in, you're close to hitting your goal, or it's a big day. It's the highest sales day of the week, whatever. You're pumped up, you write out your goals, and you've psyched yourself up, and you walk out there, and immediately some manager comes to you and asks you about some mistake that you made or some problem that happened, or some missed document or incorrect statement. And there's such a dip to your serotonin, that feel good that you had, it just drops. What leaders and managers don't realize is they can make that happen in an instant with just a few words. Why? Because the whole 0 to 7 conditioning as a child is set up to survive in a tribal environment. And what you don't want to do is piss off the chief, because if you piss off the chief, you can die. So that's already in the makeup. It's already in the DNA, so to speak. That one statement from the manager that reminds you that you're not all that is enough to take you down. So as a manager, as a leader, you don't want to be throwing those serotonin dips, especially when somebody's about to have a big meeting or a big day or go up on stage or something like that. So that's sort of a backdrop. The other thing I'll talk about is that I've seen different numbers on this, so don't quote me as a scientific fact, but people's thoughts are roughly 2/3 negative, and it's because the unconscious is set up to look for fear, and media and advertising is all set up around, let's stir up the fear and the problems, and then that's how we get people to take action. So if we're walking around with 2/3 or more negative, this is how high achievers can actually fear for their job. What's interesting, and in sales, you typically know everybody's numbers, right? We know who's doing what. You know who's in the top third, who's in the bottom third. You kind of get it. But what's interesting is oftentimes the people in the top third will be as afraid of their job, if not more, than the people in the bottom third. It just makes you go, what? But what's going on is sometimes the reason a person is achieving at that level is because there's something inside of them that has connected achievement with security. And if they're not achieving, and it's not achievement in the sense of a level, a bar, it's achievement above others. If they're not at the top, then they are actually fearing for their job. And it's the most interesting thing to watch. So knowing that as a sales manager, as a leader, knowing that people are walking around, especially some of your high producers, fearing for their job, the last thing you want to do is send a serotonin dip their way. But the other thing you want to do is give them reasons to not fear their job. And that's where the red, white, and blue language comes in that I was talking about in the last session. The other part of it is the importance of conditioning is that when you want behavior, when you're not there, it has to be conditioned. Otherwise, it's connected to you. So let's get into the red, white, and blue language. So the red, white, and blue language can be good, it can be neutral, or it can be bad. So don't get caught up on that. So there's 3 different kinds of language, and they can be good, bad, or neutral. It's more about the type of language. So red, for example, would be adjectives. White is describing absence, and then blue is the verb, observable. So in red, we're talking about you're motivated, you're a good worker, that was a good job. Or on the negative side, you could say you screwed up again, it was a bad day for you, you didn't do so good, that wasn't a good presentation. It's an adjective, it's describing something. Now, the problem with red language is that it attaches to you, the leader or the sender of the message. It doesn't attach to behavior because you're not giving it any behaviors. If a leader says to an employee, you had a great day today, there's no attachment. What does that mean? And it doesn't do anything to help that person feel more secure in their position. Now, we can't trip over the fact that why would a top producer be insecure in their position? It's beyond the scope of this. Just accept that that's a fact, right? Not all, but it's definitely out there. And the reason why, as a child growing up, perhaps that's where they got this connection. Children all the time can go from hero to zero. It can happen on the playground. It can happen at home. They're flying high. They feel like they're the favorite kid in the family. And then all of a sudden they do something bad and bam, they go from hero to zero. So saying you did a good job is not security. It doesn't provide the security. The other thing, as I said, it does is it connects the good feeling or the bad feeling if it's a negative. So if it's a negative, it's a serotonin dip, which theoretically would cause the person to avoid that behavior. And it could be somebody walks in and you look at your watch and that gets translated to I'm late, and that's a bad thing. But that serotonin dip is attached to the boss. So the next time, if that boss is not in that meeting, it doesn't really change their behavior to be on time. If that particular person is in the meeting, then they might work harder to be earlier on time. Hopefully that makes sense. On the good side, it's a dopamine boost when it's connected to the sender of the message. So if that leader's not around, my behavior is one way. If the leader is around, my behavior is different. White language is describing what's not there. You can always describe what's not there. Now, the problem with white language is that it's a very easy way to trigger people, but also it's sometimes representative of a relationship that's breaking down. when we describe you never do XYZ, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you're not a team player, you're not supporting the organization, you're not helping out. Now, all those seem to be negative, but they could be positive too. You're not one of the troublemakers. You're not a difficult employee. You're never late. You never need help. You never need excess training. So those are good, right? But it's all describing what's not there. So white language doesn't change behavior real well, and it doesn't give the person anything to lock on to, because what they know about good behavior, desired behavior, hasn't really changed from before the conversation. Blue language is the one that's the holy grail, so to speak. Blue language, it connects the good behavior to the behavior, and it's a dopamine boost. And in the case of a negative or a reprimand, it's a serotonin dip. And remember, the serotonin dip, you don't feel good, but it's connected to the behavior. It's not connected to the person. And blue language is all about observable. It's using verbs, and it's going to be longer. It's going to be a phrase because you have to describe what you saw. If you can't see it and describe what you saw, it's not blue language. So I appreciate the way that you ask that customer additional questions when you sense there was something else going on. Or you stayed on that call extra time, knowing it was going to count against you in your minutes, because you realized that if you let the customer go at that moment, it was going to be escalated into something else. That was a great job. You took a chance on that thing. You spent more money than was supposed to be spent, but what you saved was a client. And I appreciate you doing that. It doesn't always work, but this time it did. And I just want you to know I appreciate it. Whatever it is you're doing, right? What you're doing is conditioning the behaviors that you want. And if you think about it, as a leader, you should be having some offsite meetings with yourself or some private meetings with yourself where you're thinking through what are the behaviors that I want. Now you can come back and reinforce those specific behaviors. The other thing you want to do is have a 3-to-1 ratio, because what I mentioned earlier, where you have employees potentially, not all, but potentially walking around being afraid for their job, you want to counteract that with real words, with facts. So now because it gets attached to the behavior, they start doing more of the behavior. The more of the behavior they do, the more secure they become. And those high achievers who are going after achievement, it starts to work for you and for them. So 3-to-1 ratio. Now, how do you do the 3-to-1 ratio? Well, Ken Blanchard talks about the leave alone zap that managers like to do. And that is, you don't say anything, and then you come in with a negative reprimand. That's a leave alone zap. And that's why you have some employees or some organizations, employees are walking around like zombies. They're half 1 foot out the door. They're ready to leave. You don't want that. So this blue language sees them. See, the other thing is that I don't want to go into it here, but this thing called self-determination theory. Self-determination theory says that above money, people want autonomy. They want to have a feeling of competence, and they want relatedness. Blue language does all of those, right? It's rewarding the competence, and you're showing them that they're competent. It's the autonomy, because you're letting them now work on their own without you being around, because you're conditioning that behavior, and they know the behavior is right. You don't have to watch them, and you know it, and they know it. And then the other one would be the relatedness. In order to use blue language, you have to see them, and people need to be seen. This is why just even listening to somebody will do wonders sometimes. All right, so now the 3-to-1. So if you get in the habit of catching them doing something right, you catch them doing something right and you comment on it, even if it's real small, what you're doing is you're reinforcing that behavior. That's one more behavior you don't have to supervise, one more behavior you don't have to manage. You know it's there. You may have to touch it every once in a while to reinforce it, but do it enough times and you'll see this start to play. The other thing you can do is have checkpoint meetings. I definitely recommend checkpoint meetings. My experience has been that a lot of times leaders don't have checkpoint meetings because either their employee is okay, good enough in the middle, or they're going to fire them. And if they fire them, if you're in a big corporation, HR will make you have the checkpoint meetings because you have the 90-day plan and the 6-month and all that. You have to document all that stuff to do a termination because the lawsuits are just too expensive. But in the smaller organizations where they just fire people, where they're not worried so much about the repercussions, we find managers not doing checkpoint meetings. Even in the large corporations, what I've observed is that there are more checkpoint meetings done with poor employees than there are with good employees, because the thought is good employees don't need it. So literally people can go for years without ever having a checkpoint meeting. And then they become a manager, and guess what? They don't know how to do a checkpoint meeting. So you want to make sure you're doing checkpoint meetings because they work for the achievers as well, right? Just in using that blue language. So in a checkpoint meeting is a very simple process. You first listen to them. You want to listen to them, and you want to kind of suss out things that you could be doing differently. So the conversation might go something like this. One of the things we're doing is we want to become one of the leading organizations in the field of, and to do that, we need teams working together. So as your team leader, what are some of the things I can start doing that'll maybe help us move in that direction? And you just listen. Okay, that's good. Is there anything that I'm doing that's maybe getting in the way? Because everything I'm doing is to make this a better team. What are some things I could stop doing? And you just listen, you listen, you listen. And then you go into continue. Now you want to listen and make sure you hear everything, because you're going to find that some of the things you thought that they were messing up about has to do with you, which is a good thing. That's a good learning thing. You're going to get better as a leader. It's like doing a 360. Then you want to do is say, now, okay, for the second part of this checkpoint meeting, I want to talk to you because, again, we're all evolving, and you've been doing a good job with this, and that's blue language. You've been doing a good job with that, and you're going to describe it, obviously. I like the way you've been helping other team members. You step up. You don't have to be told. You step up without being told. When you see something needs to be done, you're using that blue language. You say, let's talk about getting to the next level. Now, to get to the next level, there's some things that I'd like to see you continue doing. I want to highlight these. Blue language, blue language, blue language, right? Now you're reinforcing the person. They're feeling good. The serotonin's getting a boost. They're connecting with dopamine that this behavior is something that I should do, and they're locking it in. That's one less thing you have to manage. But there are some things we need to stop doing. Now, some of these could be because it's causing challenges, but the other thing, it could be taking away from your greatest strengths. So the stop doing is and it's blue language, blue language, blue language. And it's not going to usually be 3 or 4 things. It's one. In reality, it's one. If you prepare for these meetings, you have one start, one stop, and one continue. It's just, you may think that there's a lot to talk about, but when you actually start doing it, it's not. And then the last one is continue. So it's like sandwiching the negative with 2 positives. You got the start, then the stop, and then the continue is sort of a positive, right? Blue language. Yeah, definitely keep doing this. Definitely keep stepping up and showing up and asking for more responsibility. That works because of this, blue language. So now what you're doing is using the checkpoint meeting as a way to reinforce behavior that you want. And then just periodically, because you're thinking about this, when you see them doing something right. So let's say that you have a team of 8 people, and you take it upon yourself that every week you want to give at least 10 attaboys in blue language to your team. If you just do that every single week, that's only 2 a day on a 5-day week. You'll cover your team on average. At least everybody gets 1 per week. That earns you the right to give 1 reprimand per month. I'm not saying wait for a checkpoint. That means you can give a reprimand per month for something that's going on. You want to give more reprimands, you have to give more attaboys. So keep that ratio at 3 to 1. I think in the beginning, when you start forming a team, you'll be doing it more often than not. But later on, you'll find out that people get it, and you're not doing those reprimands as often. And once you get enough positives in the bank, all you have to do is ask a question, and they'll get it. That's why that looking at the watch can speak volumes. So there you go. That's the red, white, and blue language. For the remainder of the episode, what I want to do is talk about a few things that I've picked up along the way. One is I like to call it monkey management. It was actually one of the 1 Minute Manager series, Who's Got the Monkey. And this is the idea that as the leader or the manager, that you don't want the monkeys coming back to you. And the idea of the monkey, the monkey kind of thing. But what would happen is he talks about how monkeys will jump off of the employees back onto yours or onto your desk because they come in, hey, have you gotten the answer on that XYZ yet? You're working for them now. You want to do things on purpose, and you don't want to take on those monkeys. When somebody asks you, can you help me out with XYZ? I sure can. Why don't you lay out this first? Go take a look at this resource and then get back to me with where you think the challenges are. You always put it back in their boat, unless it's your monkey to manage. And he goes on. It's a fun thing to talk about, because he goes on and says, you end up having it by the end of the week, you have the monkeys of 3 or 4 people on your team, and they're all over your desk, crapping and shouting and snorting. And you have your own monkeys to deal with. You put them all in a briefcase, you take them home for the weekend, and now they're crapping. You don't get to them, and you come in the next week, and the monkeys are all hungry, and your monkeys are hungry. All the monkeys are running around acting crazy, and the people walk in your door and say, hey, have you gotten an answer for me yet? And then the monkeys start screaming again. So the whole point is, don't accept the monkeys. You find elegant ways to give their work back to them, and this is a developmental tool. And you also can use the blue language in that as well, because you're reinforcing the fact that they actually have the the ability and the capability to do it. And I do encourage you to go back and listen to the professional one if you didn't, because I talk about uh, a, a way that managers get their employees to feel empowered, but also, even though they want them to be empowered, they actually mess that up just with their language and their reaction. So that's monkey management is important. I know one thing I used to do all the time when leaders reporting to me, I always brought a folder into the meeting, or when they came in, I had a folder on the desk, and I would have papers in there that have to do with the information. And I would touch the folder every once in a while I'm talking to them about it. And sometimes I'm asking them to take on a project or an assignment, or I'm changing the assignment and I'm tapping the folder. So these are conditions, right? What's in that folder? They're running what's in that folder, and I'm connecting the folder to this work. And the work is mine while I'm tapping it. And then once they agree that they're taking it, I then hold the folder and say, here's some information to get you started. I'll send you a couple of emails later on with some additional information, and let's check back so I can see where you are on Thursday. What that does is it sets it up that it's all on them. I'm putting the monkey all on their desk, so to speak. The next one I want to talk about is the development of new people. We talked about the blue language. We talked about the making sure that they know who the work is. And I can go into more detail, but that's the kind of stuff I'll do on the Facebook page. The Facebook page is Neurochange Habits for Leaders and Entrepreneurs. And that's where we'll get into some of this other content. But the development of new people, one of the things you want to do is foster a growth mindset. You don't want people to end up with a fixed mindset. And if you think about an employee, they come in and it's all conditioned. It's all conditioned behavior. They're conditioned to want to get along in the tribe. And once they've learned everything, then they've arrived. You don't want your employees to feel like they've arrived. Your bar has to be high enough and continuing to move, because business is not static. Business is very dynamic. It's always changing. Competitors are always stepping in. There is no, this is your job and that's it. We have to evolve. We have to evolve to stay ahead of the competition. And so if in the beginning, employee is going up, they're working hard, they're doing everything. And then once you've said, hey, good job, good job, good job, good job, it starts to level off, because they've connected that to you, that you're saying they've done a good job, there's nothing else to work on. By using blue language, and you say things like, that's great, that's like a level, that's the first step of this process we have to work through. There's still more to learn. Next week, we'll talk about X, Y, and Z. You're always painting a picture of what's next. And if you think it's hard thinking about what's next, just think about who's your second in command, who's going to replace you as the leader when you move up to the next level. So there's always something that people can be working on. And the ones who step up, they're the ones who get on the short list for your job. So you never let them feel like they've arrived. But that's not saying you don't give them praises. I just talked about blue language. So you give them reinforcement so they're not afraid for their job. What you're doing is reinforcing the behavior that keeps moving them up. You don't want a fixed mindset. I talked earlier about people walking around fearing for their job. So without getting into all the biology of it, we're very much like cells. And because all of our life it's all fractal when you start looking at it. But a cell, when it's going after nutrients, it has one configuration. That's its normal configuration to go after nutrients. When it's running into toxins, these are cells inside our body, of course. When it's running into toxins, it goes into protective mode. Now, cells that are in protective mode cannot take in nutrients. There's a different configuration. It literally changes configuration. And that protection mode is not going to be in growth mode. And to get a picture of this at an extreme level, imagine a person who's super hungry, they're starving, and they would do anything for some food, but they fall into a pool of water and they can't swim and they're drowning. You could hand them the tastiest food you can find and they're not interested. They need air, they're drowning. Same thing happens with psychological air. When a person's in fear mode, they need some psychological air. And because they're in protection mode, you could hand them the best strategies ever produced. They won't be able to see it. They won't be able to understand it because they're in protection mode. So you have to get them back to a homeostasis kind of level before they can take on those positive things. Back to the employee or team member, If they're walking around being afraid of their job, you've given them the side eye one time. It has nothing to do with what they've done. It's just that you were thinking about something else and happened to look their way, and now they're afraid for their job. They are less productive. They're less resourceful. I'm going to have to leave it there. I will not do a part 3. Podcast is life expansion after 50. So it's not all about leadership. I don't want to dominate that topic. But if you are a leader, entrepreneur, you've got teams working for you, what have you, I recommend going out to 7fitnessareas.com/connect. And there you'll find a place where you can get an invitation to NeuroChange Habits for leaders and entrepreneurs. And that's where I'll do more of this kind of content because it is very specific around developing high-performing teams. And I recognize that everybody on this listeners are not in that space. So I'm going to leave it there. This covers the professional area with respect to cognitive biases. And as I went a little bit beyond that, next time we'll talk about the emotional area. We'll see you then.